Hi, I'm Brian Russell. Welcome back to class. I want to give an overview of Exodus chapters 19 through 24. These are the critical chapters where we transition from God getting Israel out of Egypt, leading them into the wilderness, to now God brings them to Sinai, in which God is going to invite God's people into a covenant relationship with himself, and then unleash God's people or send forth God's people from Sinai on their journey into the promised land to live as God's missional people that's going to reflect God's character to the world, in the world, and for the world. So this is a pivotal set of chapters. What we're going to see here is that God is going to expand and essentially extend the Abrahamic promises and Abrahamic covenant from Genesis. If we look at the Pentateuch as a whole, there's 5 great covenants. There's the covenant with Noah in chapter 9 of Genesis, chapters 8 and 9 of Genesis. There's the Abrahamic covenant, chapter 17, with the parallel in 15. There's the Sinai covenant, which is located most specifically here, but you want to observe that in terms of the entire Pentateuch, Israel is at Sinai from Exodus 19 all the way through Numbers 10:10. And that's worth thinking about. So over 50% of the book of Exodus, Israel's at Sinai, the entire book of Leviticus, and then roughly a little less than a third of the book of Numbers has Israel located at Sinai. The 4th covenant is one of the lesser ones. That's the covenant with Phinehas later in the book of Numbers. And then the book of Deuteronomy is essentially a renewal of the Sinai covenant in Moab as God's people prepare to cross into the promised land under the leadership of Joshua. So let's step back now into this text and have a look at how some of the features here. This passage roughly breaks up into 3 big units. Again, there's some different ways to do this, but essentially the 3 units would be Exodus 19, 1 through 20, 21. And this is preparation for covenant. This contains essentially 3 sections. Section 1 is Exodus 19, and this is the truest amount of preparation. This is going to be, the key text here is going to be Exodus 19, 3-6, where we get essentially a general statement that sits here. And you want to make sure you watch all my videos on this particular passage because this is a critical text in understanding this. But this is essentially God prepares God's people for the giving of the law. The second piece that's involved here would be the giving of the 10 commandments, or the 10 commands. This is going to be chapter 20, verses 1 to 17. And then there's Moses's role, which is 20, 18 to 21, where we get Moses as the mediator. Notice in all these things, God speaks. God speaks here. And from this point on, Moses will be the one doing the speaking. So you want to observe that. So that's this first section. The second section is what we know specifically is known as the Book of the Covenant. I'm not going to try to bore down and give all the units here because this could be its own survey. So just for clarity's sake, you do want to observe that this entire array of different types of commands that are here. But the book of the covenant essentially gives particular meaning to what faithfulness is going to look like. And then the last section is the ratification of covenant. And this is going to be chapters, and this section here is 20, 22, all the way through Exodus 23. Now, forget about to mention one key structural marker. You want to observe that this verse 20:22, the Lord said to Moses, "Thus you shall say to the Israelites, you have seen for yourselves," is similar to what occurs back in chapter 19, where you have in verse 3, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the Israelites, you have seen what?" So we want to note that there is a recurrence of this framework of you have seen. So Exodus 19, you have seen. You have seen. So this gives us the rationale for the breaks. That's also why I don't try to put a second major break in here, because it seems like these are the two key breaks. And then in Exodus chapter 24, we actually have the ratification of the covenant. And you can break chapter 24 into essentially two pieces. You have 24, 1 to 8, which is the preparation. And then 24, 9 to 18, the ratification. Okay. We're looking for a bit of a climax here. It's going to be right in here where you actually have the cutting of the covenant itself. This becomes a high point that works through these materials, as this is what they're driving to. You have the offer of relationship for here. Again, check out this specific content, especially in 19:3 to 6. And what we also see combining these two sections is a broad movement of what we would call particularization. Already mentioned that these are particular pieces, but notice what we also have. We have the broad general statement here. In this section, what we have mentioned is if you truly, Exodus 19:5, if you truly listen to my voice and keep my covenant. So we have the mention of covenant here. But what does it mean to keep Yahweh's covenant? What does it mean to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, as we're also going to see in this section? Well, the 10 Commandments, this is the most general. Then we get 10 commands, which sort of crystallizes that down into 10 principles. Again, the basic idea here is, again, out of this, love God, love neighbor. And what does it look like? How do we love God, love neighbor? These give specific case studies of what it looks like in these laws. So we have from the broadest sense of what faithfulness looks like to particular applications of what faithfulness looks like on the ground we see in this text. So again, we have particularization. We have a climax. Again, you could call this these statements where you have seen kind of a recurrence of particularization, if you want to see that as well. And we also have to recognize this as preparation for what's coming, right? So it's not just particularization, but you can also argue that this whole thing has a preparatory function. what does this prepare us for? It gives the basis for the relationship in Yahweh, because we have God speaking here. We also see the basis for the future leadership of Moses. Moses has been leading God's people already in Exodus, but now we see that Moses is being further elevated because God isn't going to speak. God speaks the Ten Commandments, but it terrifies the people, right? And so this prepares us for what's coming. So Moses will be giving the law, and we see here that Moses will be going up the mountain by himself to receive the rest of the law, which will set us up for the end of the book of Exodus, which will be the tabernacle materials and also the golden calf. All right, that's a little bit of an overview of this section. Again, we could say more. If you have questions, send them my way. But this gives you some context and makes sense of kind of how to break this section down and to see how it fits in. Now, what you can also note, if you want to look at a few studies, is you can also see there's a recurrence of references to Egypt in this section. We have this piece here, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians. And then over here in this section, Egypt serves as a negative foil. So Israel's ethic is going to be based in part of not following the examples that they learned in Egypt. I like to say it this way. Exodus 1 to 18, it was easier for God to get Israel out of Egypt than it was for God to get Egypt out of Israel. Right? That's all about sanctification. So these laws here give a picture of what does a holy missional community look like. I'm Brian Russell. I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.